You're watching Reason and Theology Live, a show dedicated to charitable discussions, debates, interviews, commentary, and analysis. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
And welcome back to the show, everyone. Your host, Michael, on a Tuesday night doing another show. I got a chance to see the debate earlier on Pints with Aquinas, and it was on whether or not the SSPX is in schism. It was between Andrew Bartel and Jeff Cassman. This was my first time hearing both of them, and I have to say from the outset, I was really impressed by their conduct. Both of them handled themselves really, really well. They were very charitable. I think they really set the bar high for us when it comes to these discussions. So hopefully moving forward, we can have discussions on this very topic according to the tone that they set. So I really appreciate the way they conducted themselves. I feel that both of them argued their positions well, but I wanted to offer my thoughts. And of course, my interaction will be more with Cassman's position. And the reason why is I tend to be a little more sympathetic to Bartel's perspective. But I will say at the outset, even though I think Bartel did a good job, I think he took a different position than I would have. Let me rephrase it differently. I think he went in a different direction. He says from the outset that this isn't going to be a debate where they focus on the canonical aspect of whether or not the SSPX is in schism. I think from that point on, which was the very beginning, it was already a non-starter because he took the question outside of the objective realm, in my opinion, and put it into the subjective realm by asking the question, well, is there some kind of moral issue with them? Are they morally in schism? At least that's the best that I understood his position. If I misunderstood it, please correct me there in the comments. But I think what he did is he took it out of the objective realm and into a more subjective realm. At that point, it's just like I don't know if that's the direction I would have gone. Now, maybe you disagree, and that's perfectly fine. For me, I would have focused on the objective definition to schism and assessing whether or not the SSPX meets that description. More importantly, though, I think that there are bigger questions with the SSPX than merely the question of schism, even if they're not canonically in schism. And I'm not weighing in either way there. I'm just saying, even if they're not, I think that there are some other issues to consider with the SSPX, and I think some of that will come out here in the review. But again, that's why I'm focusing mostly on Cassman's perspective. Even though I really liked the guy, he seemed very charitable, but his perspective, his position, I would just say I don't know how it could be maintained, and for the reasons why I'll explain here in a little bit. But I'm impressed with the way that he conducted himself and the way that he argued his permission. So kudos to him, and also to Andrew for the way that he also conducted himself. Both of them represented their sides well and were charitable. So keep that in mind while I make my review here of Cassman's position. I'm in no way trying to put him down. I'm just merely trying to examine his position and his perspective objectively considered, and offering some criticism and pushback there. But that's in no way to speak about what I think about him as a person or something like that. And again, prior to today, this was the first time I've seen either one of them. So I don't have a whole lot of background knowledge about either one of them. But that's not to say anything about them. That's probably just to say how much under a rock I tend to live sometimes. Uh, but again, I was really glad to see the debate, and I was really happy that this was a topic that was picked up. I've tried to organize a debate on this very topic myself. It fell through. And part of the difficulty was finding two people who would be able to have the debate, who were knowledgeable enough to have the debate and also charitable enough to have it in a ironic way. That was really the difficulty. So props to Matt Frad for being able to put this thing together. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen. Please let me know if we have any audio or video issues, and I'll do my best to address them. Let's see. We're just going to skip to the 1 hour and 4 minute mark. I'm not going to be able to review the entire debate. It's not going to happen. But I will go to a few key moments, not even all of them that I would like to offer commentary on, but just a few of them, enough for you to get a basic feel of my perspective in relation to Cassman and his position. All right, so roughly around the 1 hour and 4 minute mark, let's go ahead and begin. And please let me know in the chat if you'll have any difficulty hearing this.
I think I would be guilty of a grave sin there. So if a priest of the society says, no, you shouldn't go to that particular parish because you're going to put the spiritual lives of your children in danger, I would agree with that. Wouldn't you? That seems like common sense to me.
They're not.
Oh, and I would have to sympathize with Cassman on this point and say that, I've been to Novus Ordo liturgies where a priest has taught heresy, and I took my kids right out of Mass and I left. So I sympathize with that perspective to an extent. But listen to this next part.
They're not. They're saying even good parishes. So I go to an excellent parish here in Montana with an excellent pastor, with a reverent celebration of the Novus Ordo Missae, and the local pastor of the SSPX chapel here would tell me I should not be going to it because the Novus Ordo Missae is actually intrinsically harmful. It's harmful to my faith.
Did you hear that? Now pay attention. Pay attention. Keep your eye on the ball, because we're about to go off track, and Cassman is going to miss that point. What Bartel is doing, and he's right to do this. This is something that I've brought up myself. He is pointing out the fact that the SSPX is offering criticism of the new liturgy, and I use that term, though I don't really prefer it, but that's, people prefer terms like new Mass and stuff like that. I don't really like that. I don't like new Rite, new Mass. I think those are all misnomers. Whatever you want to call it, Reformed liturgy, post-conciliar liturgy, I don't care what you call it, Novus Ordo, whatever. That liturgy, what they're trying to say is that objectively considered, it's harmful. Now, I hope I'm not misrepresenting the SSPX, but I've seen in multiple locations from the SSPX where they've said such things. Now, if that again misrepresents them, please let me know. But from the best that I've been able to assess, that does seem to be their position, that they would say even objectively considered, not liturgical abuses, but objectively considered, the Reformed liturgy is harmful to souls. And that's what Andrew is picking up on, and he's highlighting that fact. He's not saying, look, they're criticizing heretical priests or they're criticizing abuses. No, that's not what they're criticizing. Andrew is saying that they are criticizing the Reformed liturgy objectively considered. And he's going to say, and I agree with him, that is a problem. Because is it in fact the case that the church could promulgate a liturgy objectively considered, not abuses, but can the church promulgate a liturgy that is harmful to souls? I want to say doctrinally that's an untenable position. No, It cannot. That doesn't mean that all of its disciplinary and liturgical changes are the best. That's a different question. It doesn't mean that it should have made some of the changes that it made. That's a different question. We have to use distinctions here. Please stay focused, make distinctions, and realize I'm not saying that means that everything should have been done the way that it's done. And I'm not saying that I'm in agreement with liturgical abuses. That's not what I'm saying. So just make sure that it's clear. What I'm saying here is that objectively considered, it is an untenable position to say that the church can objectively promulgate a liturgy that's harmful to souls. I think that's a thesis that cannot be sustained. And frankly, I think that thesis, if carried to its conclusion, will lead a person outside of the church. Therefore, I think that is a dangerous position to adopt. Whether a person realizes it's dangerous or not, I think it is a dangerous position to adopt. So you heard what Andrew said. He set the stage. He qualified what he's saying. Let's listen to Cassman.
Of the missal itself, like the official missal itself, even if it said in accordance, that is an official position of the SSPX. And as you well know, Michael Davies did not hold that position. It's one way that he actually disagreed. Even though he was a foremost apologist for Lefebvre, he saw that this was completely inconsistent with the church's tradition, that there could be a universally promulgated missal that could actually be harmful to the faith. It goes completely against the church's doctrine of indefectibility. And yet the local SSPX pastor would tell me that that's harmful to my faith, even though it's good, and even though I'm getting orthodox teaching from my pastor. How do you justify that?
Yeah, I would say I would like to see in the Deposit of the Faith where it says that we are not free to criticize liturgical novelties.
Did you hear that? Did you hear that? For me, the crux of the issue is not whether the SSPX is in schism, if only that were the issue that we had to address. The bigger question, I think, is, does the SSPX maintain a doctrinal position that would destroy the indefectibility of the church by saying that the church can promulgate a liturgy that's harmful to souls? That's the question. And you'll notice Cassman did not pick up on what the question is and goes to, well, of course we can criticize liturgical novelties. Well, that's not what's in question here. To my knowledge, nobody is questioning whether or not a person can criticize liturgical novelties. Keep your eyes on the ball. It just moved. Or at least he missed it. He shifted the discussion from where it needs to be to a red herring. Yes, most certainly we can charitably criticize certain disciplinary and liturgical changes on the grounds not that they're unsafe and harmful to souls, objectively considered. Now, abuses are, but objectively considered, the changes wouldn't be harmful to souls. But might they be the most fitting? Might they be the best? That's a different question, right? And I think we can criticize the some of the liturgical forms on those grounds. Likewise, we can also criticize some of the aspects of the Tridentine liturgy on those grounds. Not on the grounds that the liturgy is harmful. The Tridentine liturgy is not harmful to souls. Might it have had some abuses? Sure, but abuse doesn't negate proper use. The liturgy, Tridentine liturgy, properly considered, is good and holy. Might it be the case that some of the aspects to it weren't the most ideal? Might there be room for some criticism there that there are some more fitting ways to do certain things? Yes, I think that we can criticize the Tridentine liturgy on those grounds. I also think that we can criticize the Novus Ordo on those grounds. because we're all in agreement that liturgical abuses, are absolutely wrong, harmful to souls. We all decry those things. That should be taken for granted. Right now, what we're talking about is objectively considered, can the liturgy be harmful to souls, that which the church has promulgated? I would argue no. And there's quite a few reasons why, but you could get just a quick taste of my perspective. If you want to go, I just posted an article, reasonandtheology.com. If you go to it, you'll see an article. And in fact, I put it in the description to this video. So just go to the show notes and you'll see a link to it. Are the church's changes to the liturgy harmful to souls, is what it's called. Check it out. I think that you'll kind of get the gist of my perspective, although there's more material from the magisterium that I could present to promote my case, but it's just kind of a short article to wet your whistle. So well worth checking out if you want to see why I think it's an untenable position, or at least an introductory reason for why. Okay, so again, notice that he completely missed the point, and then he's going to miss it again later. So it's not like it was a one-time thing. He continues to miss that point, which to me shows he's not getting the distinction. Also, he said liturgical novelties. Did you hear that? Liturgical novelties. Might we criticize the Tridentine liturgy for liturgical novelties as well? I think so. And not just the Tridentine liturgy considered from the point of, 1500s on, but the Roman Rite in previous centuries prior to the Council of Trent, were there some liturgical novelties there? Yeah, that's undeniable. So then my question is, upon what basis do we criticize the liturgical novelties in the post-conciliar era, but not also criticize some perhaps even more significant liturgical novelties in the Roman Rite in the pre-conciliar era? I want to throw that one out there, food for thought. Okay, let's continue.
It's in the Council of Trent. It's in Council of Trent, Session 22, Canon 7. It says that you may not say that the rites, liturgical ceremony.
Yeah, so Canon 7 of Session 22. Let's go to it. So he's about to get cut off. That's why I didn't finish his part there, because he's about to get cut off. But let me go to it real quick, because I'm actually not sure that it substantiates the position that Andrew is trying to maintain. If we go to Session 7, 22, Canon 7, if anyone saith that the ceremonies, vestments, and outward signs, which the Catholic Church makes use of in the celebration of masses, are incentives to impiety rather than offices of piety, let them be anathema. 2 points. Number one, I would say this applies to the liturgy that they had in their day. That doesn't necessarily mean that it applies to the post-conciliar liturgy, although I think that you could apply it. But I do want to bring out that distinction. But more importantly, what's the context of that, right? What did they mean by that? What they meant by that is they were addressing some of the reformers that were saying that, this outward external stuff that you have in the liturgy is impious. That's not what the SSPX is saying. They're saying, yeah, the ceremonies, vestments, outward signs, those are all good things. We're just saying that the liturgical reforms in the post-conciliar era, they don't do justice to the ceremonies, vestments, and outward signs and stuff like that. So I don't think that canon applies to the SSPX. I personally would not use it unless it's just to make some kind of analogy or something like that. I don't think that they actually fall under that condemnation, in other words. All right, let's continue here. I think we're going to move to the 10, let's see, I think 107 mark. Let's go there. Let me see where we're at.
That are used by the church.
Yeah, let's skip the part where he gets cut off.
that pose risk to the life of the faithful. You're not allowed to deny the dogmas of the faith. You're not allowed to.
Let me actually rewind that part. Let's see. See if I can. Yeah, just slightly, a little bit more. Let's go right there.
Does not say that the Novus Ordo Missae is invalid. Quite the contrary.
All right, so he's saying the SSPX does not say that the Novus Ordo Missae is invalid. That's not the issue. That's once again a red herring. That wasn't what Andrew was arguing, and I think that that's not really the criticism that we could offer against the SSPX, even if Andrew argued that, which he did not, to my knowledge. He was not saying that the SSPX is saying the Mass, the Novus Ordo is invalid. He was saying that they're saying it's unsafe and harmful to souls. Those are two different things. Something can be valid and yet harmful to souls. In theory. I'm not saying that the church puts forward anything that's valid but harmful, but in theory, that's most certainly the case. And I mean, I think even the SSPX recognizes that when they speak of the validity of some of these new sacraments, the Novus Ordo liturgy, I should say, and its sacraments and administration of the sacraments, but they would still say that, it's still harmful to souls for other reasons. So yeah, I think he's missing the distinctions here. And for me, I found that disappointing because I would really like for him to engage the crux of the matter. And that is the thesis that the church can promulgate objectively considered a liturgy that's harmful to souls. That is the thesis. And that is, in fact, I think more important than the question, is the SSPX in schism? Not that the question of schism is not as important as this issue. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is most certainly the SSPX is in a more unique situation than your average person that you would say is your average group that's in schism. So it's a lot more complex with the SSPX. So for that reason, I don't find it as beneficial to discuss that over the thesis that the church can promote something officially considered that's harmful to souls. Not that I found it to be an unworthy endeavor, because as I said, I've actually tried to put forward and orchestrate this very debate thesis. So
they would say that all of the sacraments, even the Reformation since Vatican II, all of those sacraments have been reformed, still retain their validity. Now they criticize those things that are missing, and I think they're right to do that. And I believe that canonically speaking, Catholics have the right to criticize developments in the church that pose risk to the life of the faithful.
Pose risks to the life of the faithful. We all agree that the liturgical abuses pose risks to the life of the faithful. We all agree there. But what the church has objectively promulgated, does it pose risks to the life of the faithful? Now, Andrew was situating this discussion in the objectively considered realm of what the church has promulgated. So I would be curious to know, does Cassman take the position that the church can promulgate something that is risky to souls? It sounds like it to me. It does sound like it. I wish he would offer some clarification there and explain to me how that works with the church's indefectibility.
Faithful. You're not allowed to deny the dogmas of the faith. You're not allowed.
Nobody is saying that the SSPX is denying the dogmas of the faith. Again, a red herring. That's not what's being discussed.
To criticize the things that are in Scripture, but certainly
also irrelevant.
These kinds of novelties that have come up in the last 50 years, and they're novelties.
What novelties? And again, if we're talking about abuses, yeah, there's novelties all over the place. Sure, I'm not here to defend those, but what I will say is some of the changes in the post-conciliar era, liturgical changes that are officially promulgated, if we want to speak of them as novelties, we have to be consistent and do the same with the Roman Rite and some of its novelties historically. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, talk to your Orthodox friends and they will tell you. Although, of course, I've done videos on this before, right? That being said, I think that the novelties that exist in the Roman Rite, even the preconciliar ones, are within the realm of good, right? I don't think that they're evil novelties. I don't think that they're evil. So one novelty would be restricting communion to the laity under one form. I think it was necessary at one point for the Roman Rite to do that. So there was a really good reason for it to do that. And so I think that that was a good novelty that the Roman Rite introduced. Does the need for that still remain today? I don't think so. Therefore, I think that it was good that this was reversed in the post-conciliar era. But make no mistake, it was a reversal, not a novelty. It was actually the Tridentine liturgy that is the novelty. And so some of the things that you might hear a person say is a novelty in the post-conciliar era is actually not a novelty, it's a restoration. That being said, I will go to bat and defend the Tridentine liturgy and some of these liturgical novelties in the Roman Rite over and against the Orthodox and say there were good reasons for them to do that. I don't think that they're ideal. I don't think it's ideal to administer communion under one kind. I don't think that's ideal. You receive the same amount of grace, so it's still within the realm of good, but it's not ideal insofar as it doesn't fully express the original intention. So in that sense, I would say it's less than ideal. But I'll go to bat for Latin Rite Catholics and defend them against the Orthodox who say these dirty Latins are just all changing everything and, committing sacrilege. And no, I'll defend the Roman Rite. I'll even in the preconciliar era, and I'll defend some of these novelties, but make no mistake, they are novelties. So if we're going to criticize the the post-conciliar era for its liturgical novelties, just make sure that you're being consistent and doing the same to the preconciliar era, and make sure that you're not calling what's actually a restoration and a reversal a novelty. But we don't get specifics here, so I don't know for sure what Cassman has in mind.
It's not just in the specific form, they're novelties like in the life of the church. So I think, I obviously I can't defend everything that every priest might have said somewhere. I can't even know what they really said, but I believe that we can have these charitable criticisms of some of these things that happen. And I would also point out one more thing.
We most certainly can have charitable criticisms of some things that have happened, not only of abuses, but also of the liturgical reforms in the post-conciliar era objectively considered. We can criticize some of those. We can say, look, I'm not sure this was a really good idea prudentially. I'm not sure this, using this much of the vernacular was a good idea. I'm not sure that this or that aspect was necessarily the best thing. I'm not sure that versus populum was a really good, was the ideal. I think that ad orientem is the ideal. I think that we can make those kinds of criticisms. But that doesn't mean that we're saying evil versus good. We're saying good versus best. And I think we need to keep that in mind. Yes, we can have those discussions. But if you're saying evil versus good and saying that objectively considered some of these official changes to the liturgy are evil and harmful to souls, I think that's an untenable position. I don't think you can defend that from the magisterium of the church. I think there are things there from the magisterium that would correct that perspective. And I think that ultimately you are touching on the matter of the indefectibility of the church, and you're doing violence to it. And violence that, in my opinion, will eventually lead you from the Catholic Church if you carry that position to its logical conclusion.
Since we're still waiting for Andrew to come back, There are a lot of Eucharistic abuses that are happening in churches,
Mhm.
right? Where
And I've seen them, and I've decried them, and I've written to bishops, and I've gone to bat to defend the church in the proper way in which they should be done, and I've been penalized for doing it. Penalized by bad priests, suspending me from communion for simply saying it's wrong to spill the precious blood. So I've gone to bat and put my money where my mouth is, and stood up for the right administration of the sacraments when it counts. So I agree with them. There are abuses, and we should address those. We need to do so charitably, but we need to be firm here and address them, especially when they pertain to matters of sacrilege. When we really start getting into, okay, this isn't just a minor abuse, this is sacrilegious. Yeah, I'll be charitable, but I'm going to be much more firm at that point. And I think that we should. So I'm sympathetic to him here, but I just want to say, look, I think that sometimes what we're doing is we're overreacting. Well, we're trying to address the problem of liturgical abuses with an abuse itself and with an untenable perspective. That would be my criticism.
it's not uncommon that we have a priest who hands out 6, 8, 10, 12 chalices to lay people, and then the priest sits down.
And that's an abuse. And I don't think that there's any legitimate reason for that to happen. When you have canons in the early church forbidding deacons to receive communion first, but the presbyter should receive first, then the deacons, how much more should we forbid laity to administer the sacraments while the priest just sits there and takes a break?
And those folks walk all over a church handing out communion to other people who come up with their dirty hands,
dirty hands. I mean, I guess some people come up for communion with dirty hands. I don't know why they necessarily have to be dirty. And has the priest thoroughly washed his hands? I mean, that one I didn't get. And this next part, I think that's also an untenable position. Listen here.
Unconsecrated hands.
Unconsecrated hands. Yeah, I've heard this one a lot, and I understand it's based on Aquinas, and I don't think that this is a tenable position. Is it the case that it's most fitting for consecrated hands to handle the sacred elements? Of course. I don't know why anybody would dispute that unless they don't believe that there's a distinction between the ministerial priesthood and the royal priesthood. But aside from some reason like that, yeah, of course it's more fitting and more appropriate for a priest and those who have consecrated hands to handle the sacred vessels and the sacraments versus those who don't have unconsecrated, or those who have unconsecrated hands. But let's not take that too far. Let's not go too far with that one. Because what we're doing at this point is we're indicting the early church. And the irony here is we're now indicting the apostolic practice. The apostolic practice and the practice in the first millennium was predominantly administration in the hands. Now, I know that there are some spurious quotes that some people try to pass around online. Very poorly sourced quotes, and they'll present that as if it settles the matter. And these quotes speak about, the administration of the sacraments on the tongue. And though you do have that in the first millennium, the predominant view until roughly the late 1800s, East and West, was on the hands. That's why you even have the Council of Trullo, which the Eastern Orthodox accept as part of the Sixth Ecumenical Council, and Rome has roughly accepted some of Trullo, but it's a pretty complicated history there. It's basically accepted the canons of Trullo insofar as they don't contradict, canons in the Roman communion. But that's a whole different matter. We won't go down that rabbit trail, but I do bring up Trullo to say that there's, of course, a curious canon there that speaks about the impiety of administering Holy Communion on golden vessels and utensils, and rather that they should be administered on the hand. And the reason why they should be administered on the hand is these golden utensils and things like that weren't made in the same way, with as much dignity as the human hands. We'll have to maybe go back and read the canon, but it brings that out about how there's more dignity to receiving what God created here in the human body versus just this mere inanimate matter like gold or something like that. So they actually take the exact opposite position and say that it would be impious to use, vessels to administer Holy Communion. Of course, it was also very prevalent, especially in Egypt, for laity to self-communicate, to take the Eucharist home and self-communicate. And not only in times of persecution. Some people will try to say, oh, it's only in times of persecution. Actually, no, if you read more into it, it's not just in times of persecution. And you might say, oh, well, that's just Egypt. But again, the predominant view worldwide was to administer the sacrament on the hands. So if we take this too far, we're now indicting the apostolic practice and the first millennium. And I'm not willing to go there. Now, I will go to bat for those who say it's more fitting that, especially in the Roman Rite, a Catholic does not receive on the hands, but should receive on the tongue. I take the position in the Roman Rite, a Catholic should receive on the tongue. And unless it's necessary to receive on the hand, they should communicate on the tongue. But if you're with a priest who doesn't know better and only will give communion to you on the hand, yes, I think that you should go ahead and receive on the hand rather than not receive communion at all. But other than a case like that, I think it's much more proper and fitting and appropriate and even more respectful in today's conditions to receive on the tongue in the Roman Rite rather than on the hand. Not because it's intrinsically evil, because it's not. Receiving communion on the hand is not intrinsically wrong or evil, but just because of how careless people are today. I'm not so sure that in the first millennium they were as careless as we are. I'm not so sure that they were. I think that they were probably a little bit more cognizant of the need to be respectful here. There were some cases where women were required to use a cloth over their hand. I mean, clearly they're aware of that they're receiving something very, very holy, right? They maybe couldn't express it in Aristotelian terms like us today or something, but they were clearly aware that this is truly Christ and were respectful. That doesn't mean that there weren't liturgical abuses. There most certainly were, but I think that in today's context, is communion in the hand a good idea in the Roman Rite? No. I don't think so from what I've seen. Man, I remember as an altar server using, the what's it called? The paten, where you go and you put it under them before they receive communion, and it's there to catch it in case it falls. And of course, inevitably one time it did fall and I was able to catch it. So I think that, even using those things are important in the Roman Rite. Some people don't even know what they are, because I remember serving at one liturgy, and this Eucharistic minister, or extraordinary minister of Holy Communion is a proper term. I know Eucharistic minister isn't. This EMHC, female altar server, I guess, she was administering communion and I was using the paten. And no, I'm not in favor of females administering Holy Communion. I don't think it's evil or immoral, but I don't think it's fitting. And I think it sends out the wrong message. But I know I'm going way off track here, but I do want to say that I remember I was using the paten while she was administering the sacrament, and she kept looking at me funny, like, and I didn't know why she was looking at me funny. And she said, "What is that?" And I had no idea what she was talking about. So I just, kept doing what I was doing. And then she asked again, like forcefully, what is that you're doing? And I realized she didn't know what I was actually doing, that this is here to catch the Eucharist in case it falls. And I'm just thinking, oh gosh, wow, you're administering the sacrament and you don't even know about this. Like, what are we doing here? Come on. I don't think you should be administering the sacrament at this point. Not that I thought you should have been anyway, but you definitely don't need to be now. Not that I can do anything about it, but stuff like that is just like, oh man, come on. Is this really a good idea in the Roman Rite when we're not even using patens and we're dropping the Eucharist and people receive in the hand and have fragments of the Eucharist and aren't mindful of them? I'm not saying that in the early church they wouldn't have had, especially when they were using leavened bread, they wouldn't have had fragments fall here and there. But I do think that their intentions were to be respectful. And I don't think people's intentions on the whole today in the Roman Rite are to be respectful. And that's my problem. And that's why I would say I think it's more appropriate to receive on the tongue. Even though I think that is a liturgical novelty in the Roman Rite, I do think that it is a good novelty and more fitting, even though it might not be fitting as far as the original intention, but it is more fitting and appropriate for today. So notice the very nuanced position I'm taking here. All right, let's continue.
And our Lord is spread all over that church, trampled upon. Well, that's a Eucharistic abuse. Okay?
Yeah, and it really does boil my blood whenever I think of sacrilege like that. So look, I totally am sympathetic there, but again, I don't want to adopt a position that would indict the first millennium. So I want to be careful in the way that I phrase my criticisms here.
Fair and simple. Why is it wrong for a Catholic to say, I don't want to risk that. I don't want to risk stepping on the body of our Lord?
No, nobody's saying that is wrong. But that's not but see, that's not the question. The question is, are the SSPX right in saying what is officially promulgated by the church is harmful to souls? Is when the church allows for communion on the hand today objectively, is that harmful to souls? No. If you were to say yes, you got to indict the first millennium. I want to say no. Objectively considered, it's not harmful to souls. The abuses that people are causing and the lack of respect is harmful to souls, but that's a problem with them, not with what is promulgated. But you could criticize the Roman Rite today on grounds that this is not fitting and most appropriate in today's case. I think you can criticize the church on those grounds, the prudential judgment being made here. Okay, let's move forward. I think that we're going to move to the 1 hour 12 minute mark here. 1 hour 12. Yeah, right around there.
Just saying that the society doesn't fit that model, whereas the Germans do. And
well,
I
excellent.
think
Then I've made my point. I've made my point, Jeff, because I've already given you one that you have not answered. I could give many more, but the one that you have not answered is that the SSPX actually rejects an officially promulgated missal.
You heard it? Andrew's being very clear about what he's criticizing. He's being incredibly explicit. I think he did a good job there, being very clear what he's saying. The problem is Cassman isn't picking up on that. So let's continue.
Riverside FM is the easiest
Sorry,
way
y'all.
to produce a high quality podcast anywhere.
Even when it's said perfectly, reverently, even ad orientem, they say it's actually intrinsically evil. How is, and they refuse to worship with Catholics. So not only is it an offense against the submission to the authority of the Pope, but it's also an offense against charity on the horizontal level.
And I think also this is a problem with people who are in the FSSP sometimes, refusing on matters of principle to concelebrate with their bishop. I think that is a problematic position. So this isn't necessarily just something that's limited to the Society of St. Pius X.
In refusing to worship with Catholics according to that rite. How is that not?
And I wouldn't call the Reformed liturgy that right, but that could just have been a slip of the tongue, kind of off the cuff. I do it. We all do it. I highlight it here, even if it may have been a slip of the tongue. I highlight it because I don't want somebody to get the wrong impression and think that it is a different rite. The Roman Rite is still preserved substantially in the Reformed liturgy. It's not a different rite. Now, the way it's celebrated in some parishes, I don't recognize it to be the Roman Rite. So abuses, yeah, I don't recognize that as the Roman Rite. But I'm not here to defend those. So, I mean, you throw them under the bus all you want. I don't care. I'm not gonna save them. I'm gonna get in the driver's seat of the bus and I'm gonna put it back in reverse and run them over again. I'm going to be right there with you, just running them over and over and over. I am not defending those who are abusing the liturgy by any means. All right, let's move forward.
Was that not schism?
Unfortunately, you were gone when we kind of went into one of these questions, but I'm happy to review the criticism of the Novus Ordo Missae. I believe it's undeniable if you put the two rites next to one another to look and see that the Novus Ordo Missae is deficient when compared to its predecessor. I don't think you...
On what grounds? Deficient on what grounds? See, I don't concede that. Deficient on what grounds? Might we speak of the difference between good and versus ideal as a deficiency? Yeah, if that's what we're calling deficiency, yeah. But usually a deficiency has a more negative connotation than that. So I would say define deficiency. And on what grounds do you say that what has been promulgated is deficient? And are you willing to apply those same standards to the Tridentine liturgy itself? Are you willing to apply those to them? Because what you're going to realize is when you get out of the little bubble of traditional Roman Catholicism, you have to start interacting with Eastern Orthodox, you're going to realize, some of the positions I'm adopting here, I'm now hearing the Orthodox use those same criticisms now against my Tridentine liturgy. And now you realize you're inconsistent. When you get outside of the traditional Catholic bubble and you have to start interacting with others, then you realize, hey, I got to adopt a more nuanced perspective than this, because now I'm hearing Orthodox using my arguments that I'm using against the Novus Ordo, and they're using it against me for the Tridentine liturgy. And really, frankly, I'm being inconsistent.
You could deny that there are a great many prayers and a lot of scripture that was in the older and is lacking in the new.
And here, I agree. It is more fitting that those be there. But are we willing to use that same criticism against the preconciliar liturgy? Are we willing to use that same criticism? Because I think if you apply that standard to the Roman Rite, after it's promulgated after Gregory the Great, is truncated. Moreover, even the Byzantine liturgy gets truncated. Are we going to now criticize the liturgy of Chrysostom? And I'm talking about in ages past, not in some kind of post-conciliar era. I'm talking about the liturgy being severely shortened in the first millennium, taking out prayers, minimizing and reducing the canon, making it shorter. And that's also in the Roman Rite. Is that it seems to me that if we're going to use this criticism in the post-conciliar era of that liturgy, we have to apply the same to the Roman Rite historically and say, okay, well, it was gutted at certain parts and at certain times in history. It was truncated. Does that make it deficient? Does that make the Tridentine Mass deficient? I don't think that's an appropriate term to use of the Tridentine Mass, however true that may be, loosely speaking. I don't think deficient is the appropriate way to speak of it. Expedited, okay. But the Roman Rite has always been known for being a very expedited liturgy. Just compare it to some of the Eastern liturgies. It's very expedited, even the Tridentine liturgy. The Roman Rite has been known for that expedited efficiency and making things as short as they possibly can be. And perhaps the post-conciliar liturgy, prudentially speaking, this wasn't a good direction to go, right? I think we can criticize the post-conciliar liturgy on those grounds. I make that criticism myself. So what he's criticizing here, I actually agree with. I'm just saying, express it in appropriate terms, because if you don't, you're going to end up shooting yourself in the face if you hold to the Tridentine liturgy. Now, if you're, an Eastern Orthodox, you might dodge that bullet here and there, but ultimately even the Byzantine liturgy has been truncated. So, you're not ultimately going to dodge that one.
So I think the word reject has to be clarified there. When the society criticizes those deficiencies, I believe those are objective. I doubt that you're going to tell me that the Novus Ordo Missae is more spiritually edifying, produces greater graces.
This is something that is subjective. Is the Tridentine liturgy more spiritually edifying than the new liturgy officially promulgated, properly celebrated, not an abuse? We all agree. An abuse, Novus Ordo versus a Tridentine liturgy any day. We all agree there. What we're saying is the best Tridentine liturgy versus the best Reformed liturgy. Some people will feel that the Reformed liturgy is speaks to them more, but that's a subjective thing, because you receive the same amount of grace from either liturgy. Now, you might not be best disposed to one liturgy compared to another, and that might impact how much grace you receive, but that's not because less grace is offered. It's because you're less disposed. It's more of a problem with you than it is the liturgy. So I recognize there's a subjective aspect there, but objectively considered, all of the liturgies offer the same amount of grace. The same Christ is being offered to you, so you're not getting any additional grace being offered objectively considered in one liturgy versus another. All right, let's continue.
And I would love to know what the fruits of that would be as proof of that assertion. So I think it's
the
fair.
The fruits have been excellent, especially in the Church of Africa. I mean, that Africa and Asia both, that was one of the reasons for the reforms. We needed a rite that was more adaptable and in many ways simplified, so that the same process of adaptation and culturation that had happened with European culture with the rites could also happen within Africa, and that African.
Let's skip forward to 116, right around there.
For Latin Mass Catholics, why are we constantly pursuing this division? It should be good enough merely to say, if you love your rite, you can practice your rite. Now,
but the preconciliar liturgy is not a different rite than the postconciliar liturgy. It's the same rite. It's the Roman Rite. It's not a different rite. That's what I don't accept. I don't accept that the postconciliar liturgy, objectively promulgated and properly celebrated, is a different rite. I don't accept that, and I don't think that's a tenable position, as I've argued elsewhere. It's just an unsustainable position in my estimation, and the feedback that I've heard hasn't properly accounted for the data I've put forward, in my estimation, right, for whatever that's worth. So I remain unconvinced that it's a new rite. Again, for whatever my opinion is worth, I don't see it as a new rite. I want to say you still have the Roman Rite. It's still there. It's in the Novus Ordo. The question is it being properly celebrated? That's where you should be fighting. And yeah, you might also objectively criticize prudentially some of the liturgical changes, but I think that those are very minor compared to the liturgical abuses. I mean, that's just in a very different category at that point. What we really need to be fighting against are the abuses, not the nuanced distinctions between the pre and post conciliar liturgy objectively considered.
The Institute of Christ the King in SSP does not forbid its followers to go to the mass, to the Novus Ordo masses. They you
hear that? All right. Now, assuming Cassman is right, which I'm sorry, Andrew is right, which I believe he is from what I've seen from the SSPX, that they would objectively, I'm not saying I've just unofficially, a SSPX priest will say this. To my recollection, I've seen on their website them officially saying that you shouldn't go to a Novus Ordo, even if it's properly celebrated. You shouldn't go to it. It doesn't seem to me that Cassman is picking up on that. He thinks that this is still in the realm of, well, a priest here and there may say it. To me, it's as if he's not aware of what the society is actually officially saying.
Their critique has to do on the liturgical level, but they do not claim that it is harmful to the faith. That is something that is distinctive to the Society of St. Pius.
Right. The Institute of Christ the King and FSSP objectively are not saying that. You might find some rogue priests who say that off the cuff or something, or off the record, but objectively, that's not their position. Whereas it seems objectively, officially, publicly, the SSPX is officially saying just that. You should not go to the Novus Ordo, even the ones that don't have abuses. They would say it's still harmful to your soul. I don't think that that is a position that can be sustained, and I think that that is a doctrinal error. I think that the SSPX maintains a doctrinal error whenever they say that, because it objectively undermines the indefectibility of the church. I think that that position falls under certain theological censors, not the least of which is, a very minor one would be offensive to pious ears, scandalous sounding, evil sounding. Those are the minor censors. I think that position falls even under some of the major censors. I would maintain that. So I think that that's a bigger problem for the SSPX. Let's say that they're not in schism. Okay. I think that they have something that's just as bad. They're maintaining a position that goes against the indefectibility of the church, and I think should be censored. It's a doctrinal error. Now, if I'm wrong, please correct me. I'd love to be wrong here. But I don't see a way around it. To me, that seems, and I would argue and contend that that is a doctrinal error, to say that the church can officially promulgate a liturgy that is harmful to souls. Now, if that's not what the SSPX is saying, I'm willing to stand corrected. But from the content that I've seen on their website, it sure seems like that's what they're saying. And Andrew's saying the same thing, so he's picking up on that same stuff. Again, if they want to come back and say, no, that's not exactly what we're saying, okay, great. I'm willing to hear it out and say, okay, well, I'm glad to hear that's not what you're saying, because if that is what you're saying, I think that you fall under certain theological censors.
Pius X.
Well, I want to say that the priest who flies into Nashville every week to offer sacraments to the faithful here, who prefer the 1962, he doesn't forbid anybody to do anything. He doesn't have that power.
See that, but that's irrelevant. We're not talking about a random priest. We're talking about what's officially said by the SSPX publicly. You see that? I mean, again, Andrew has been incredibly clear about his position, and the fact that he's speaking about what they are objectively saying about the liturgy, objectively considered. And again, it's like Cassman is just not picking up on that. And to me, that's the crux of the debate. That even more than the question of are they in schism, that's really, in my opinion, where it's at. I wish he was picking up more on that, because I'd like to see more interaction with that. But, during debates, especially when they're live, you don't always, it's kind of like whenever you're doing a debate, it's like drinking from a fire hydrant. Honestly, it really is. Even when it's something you're well prepared for. There's just, unless you're just a professional debater, when you do a public debate like that, it's hard to catch everything. It's hard because you're also having to think of your response. In addition to listening to them and making sure you're paying attention, you're also having to think of, well, what am I going to say next? Because I have to speak next. So it's easy to miss certain things whenever you're in a debate live. So, in credit to Cassman, I've been there, I understand, but it's like, man, he's said this multiple times. Like he's hammered this home multiple times and made it very explicit what he's talking about. So even if you're a little distracted, and it's like he continues to say it, I don't know how we're missing this at this point, but oh well, let's continue.
Or he's not a pastor. He can't bind us. He's a priest. So, maybe some priests that have done those kinds of things.
That's not what he was saying. He wasn't saying it was some priest who did them. He was saying this is what they are officially saying. But now Andrew wasn't, to my recollection, going into detail of where they say that. And I think that may be where his deficiency was. Maybe he should have brought it to his attention where they explicitly say that. And say, like, for example, I just saw on their website, they explicitly say, and I mentioned it in the article that I referred y'all to, they say, quote, "The doctrinal deficiencies of the new Mass has rendered it a danger to the faith of Catholics." The doctrinal deficiencies of the new Mass. The doctrinal deficiencies of the new Mass. We're not talking about abuses here. They're attributing to what is officially promulgated by Rome, doctrinal deficiencies. I don't think that can be sustained. I don't. Unless what you mean by deficiency is this doesn't as clearly express something. Okay, if that's what you mean by deficiency, okay. But quite a few things in the early church didn't clearly express certain aspects to the mystery. Now, I'm not going to say it's a deficiency in the sense that it's evil. I'm going to just say I think we could be more clear, and we should be more clear. And that's all they're saying. Oh, okay, well, great. We're in agreement. Yeah, that we should be more clear about certain things in the Reformed liturgy. I don't know how you could argue against that. Of course we should, but that's not in the realm of evil versus good. It's in the realm of good versus ideal and best. And when I hear doctrinal deficiency, what I hear when I hear that is, I think you mean more than good versus best. I think you mean harmful versus safe. And I think you're saying that the liturgy is harmful. And I think that's where you're crossing a line. Okay, let's consider a little bit more what they say here in the debate.
We take him aside and say, Father, maybe you should phrase it differently and explain what the dangers would be for Eucharistic abuses or heresy or something like that. But I want to touch on something you said that I think is really critically important, because objective reality is important. You said that the fruits of the Novus Ordo Missae.
All right, let's move to right around
Novus
here.
Ordo Missae is as destructive.
This is 1 hour, 19 minute mark.
To the faith as the SSPX claims that it is, then it should be dwindling in Africa instead of exploding.
Jeff, why don't you have the final word here before we move into Q&A, if you want to respond at all?
I think that one difference between Andrew and I appears to be that I believe there's a crisis in the church, and I think it's a worldwide phenomenon that started in the late 1960s.
Wait.
Manifested itself as...
No, I'm sorry. That's an untenable position. It did not start in the 60s. Some of these problems we've been dealing with for centuries. Some of them have become more prevalent since the 60s. Yeah. But I don't think it's necessarily all from the 60s. Now, maybe that's not what he meant. Again, he's probably just kind of speaking off the cuff here, but I want to be precise. Again, I understand sometimes you misspeak. I misspeak. We all do that. I'm not criticizing him if that's not what he actually means, if really pushed on it. But I do want to push just in case that is what he means. I want to say that's not that's an over idealized view of the preconciliar era. To think that everything, all these problems, it all went to hell in a handbasket in the 60s. No. And that's also not to maintain the more infiltration kind of conspiracy theories out there either, that would say, oh no, this has all been in the making for 100 or so years. That's not to accept that position either, because some of that is misinformation, and some of it is accurate, some of it's misinformation, some of it's distorted, and some of it doesn't get at the roots of the problems. They even predate that period. And so I want to say the problems we're experiencing today, some of them have been a long time in the making. A long time. Some of them are recent. Yeah. Some of them are not recent. They've been in a long time in the making, and maybe we can say the bottom fell out in the 60s. Yeah. Did it fall out because of the Second Vatican Council, though? I'm not so sure. I think it more fell out because of revolutions in society. Some would say those revolutions in society are because of the Second Vatican Council. I don't think you can maintain that. Might we be able to say that the Second Vatican Council did not best prepare us for the problems that have, arisen in the modern period? You might be able to argue that to an extent. And again, what if the Second Vatican Council, after all, actually prevented an even greater fallout? Maybe not. All right, let's move forward.
Every level of Catholic life, from the family, where we see that Catholics contracept and divorce at the same rate that the secular world does. We see it in the priesthood.
But is that because of the liturgy? Is that because of the criticisms that the SSPX offers? Is that the real impetus behind these problems? I'm not so sure.
With a massive loss in vocations and men choosing not to enter the seminary. Again, even in healthy places, we see a shortage of priests. Even in Africa, we do not have the level of vocations that we saw, for example, in the United States before the 1960s.
Yeah, we're not experiencing this great springtime as some people would have you believe. We're not. That being said, even though we're not experiencing this wonderful springtime, I think sometimes we go too far in the positions that we adopt to address the problems. That's what I'm just wanting to do is, okay, what is going to be our response to the problems that we're seeing today in the church and this crisis, which I agree we have a crisis. I'm not so sure that there ever was a period in time when we didn't have a crisis. Seems like we've always had a period. We've always had a crisis in the church. The more you study church history, the more you become attuned to that. Are there some unique aspects to today? Yes. I remember once I used to say that this is the worst crisis we've ever experienced. It's more than all of the crises combined. I'm not so sure about that one anymore. I do think it's different than some of the crises we've seen in the past. But I don't know. I look at some points in history and I'm like, ugh. Man, they had it pretty bad. They had it pretty rough. We have it good today in some areas. Okay, so let's move a little bit forward here.
It is not merely a phenomenon to the West where people fall in love with tradition. That might be the perspective of an American, but if you look at, for example, the work of the Society of St. Pius X, they have hundreds of chapels around the world, in Australia and in New Zealand.
Notice that fall in love with tradition. Does that mean that the post-conciliar liturgy is not traditional? And are we confusing certain novelties in the Roman Rite as traditional? I mean, again, an Orthodox is going to push back on your Roman Rite and is just going to say, this whole thing is filled with novelties. And they're going to say, how can you even speak about tradition? So you got to be careful when you speak of tradition in the Roman Rite. What do you mean by tradition? What do you mean? Because I can offer some serious pushback on how traditional the Roman Rite is.
England, in Japan, throughout Southeast Asia, in China, where they have to smuggle themselves in to.
And by the way, I do think that it's preserved tradition proper, right? Capital T. I think all of the liturgies officially have preserved the sacred tradition of the church. Some of the human apostolic traditions, yeah, I can offer some criticisms of the Roman Rite on that one. I think some aspects to the Roman Rite, even when just thinking of the Tridentine liturgy, I think some of its aspects are novel and they have innovations that go that are at odds with human apostolic traditions. That doesn't mean the church doesn't have authority to do those things. It does. It does. It does. It does. It does. If the church has the authority to reverse Acts 15 on eating meat with blood in it, which it did at the Council of Florence, if the church has that authority, it's got the authority to, modify certain human apostolic traditions when necessary. I don't think that we should, unless absolutely necessary. Unless the salvation of souls is at stake, I say leave it untouched. If it's a human apostolic tradition, don't touch the thing. Don't touch it. Unless it's absolutely necessary, don't touch it. It's what was handed down to us. Don't alter it. We don't need to move things around. Again, if the salvation of souls requires it, the church has that authority. Okay. And it's the church ultimately who determines prudentially whether or not it should make those changes. All right, let's move forward.
To confirm people, this is not merely a Western phenomenon. How could it be? This is the apostolic liturgy that formed Western civilization.
Oh, you heard it. You heard it. I can't let that one slide. I can't let that one slide. To me, that was probably the most important part of the debate, aside from the question of whether or not the SSPX maintains a doctrinal error against the indefectibility of the church. Is the Roman Rite, as expressed in the Tridentine liturgy, the apostolic liturgy, or even an apostolic liturgy? If we're talking about the substance of the liturgy, yes. But I would say that of all the liturgies, and I would also say that of the Novus Ordo. So I would say that applies to all the liturgies that have been promulgated. They are all vehicles of sacred tradition. And they're all apostolic in the sense of the substance, the very substance of them. But can we speak of the Roman Rite as the apostolic liturgy in a way that we can't say the same thing about the Novus Ordo, which is what he's doing here? Because he's clearly speaking about the Tridentine liturgy as the apostolic liturgy, as opposed to the Novus Ordo. And I don't think he's just talking about abuses. I think he's talking about the thing objectively considered, because the context of this whole discussion has been the liturgy objectively considered. Now, maybe, Mr. Cassman can offer some clarification. I'd be happy to stand corrected if that's not what he meant. But if you mean that the Roman Rite, as expressed at Trent and after Trent, is the apostolic liturgy, according to him, and you can't say that the Novus Ordo is the apostolic liturgy, I have to say, okay, well, wait. Let's think about that for a second. You're saying there are some changes introduced into the missal of Paul VI, that makes it no longer an apostolic liturgy, that introduces rupture there to where it's no longer an apostolic liturgy. Okay, let's say that that's his position, because it sounds like it is. Think through that. Think through that. Are you picking up on a problem here? In the first century, the liturgy was pretty different than any of the liturgies from the 4th century on. I mean, the way in which the liturgy was generally celebrated in the Jerusalem church, a Jewish liturgy. I mean, think of the very primitive church, the primitive liturgy with its agape feasts, a very Jewish context. And then compare it to, I don't know, a 5th century liturgy. The amount of discontinuity that you have between the 1st century and the 5th century is greater than the discontinuity that you have from the time of John the 23rd's liturgy to Paul the 6th liturgy. So if the Reformed liturgy is a rupture to the apostolic liturgy, what is the Tridentine liturgy? It's 100 ruptures. It's significantly different. Now, might we speak of them as the same substantially? Yeah, okay. But I can say the same thing of the Novus Ordo. So we have to be talking about accidents here. Okay, accidental changes, accidental features, accidental differences. Okay. Well, the amount of accidental differences between the 1st century liturgies and liturgies of the 5th century are way more significant than the accidental liturgies between the Tridentine liturgy and the current 3rd edition of the Roman Missal. So it sounds pious when we speak of, oh yes, this Tridentine liturgy, it's the apostolic liturgy. It sounds nice. The Mass of the Ages, all that rhetoric. It sounds nice until you actually start putting it to the test of the test of history and start to actually consider the 1st century and the 2nd century liturgies. If the Novus Ordo is a rupture and is an innovation, what is the Tridentine liturgy? Unless you think that the Tridentine liturgy, in most of its form, is how it was celebrated in Rome in the 1st century, which is an untenable thesis. That's an untenable thesis. I'd love to see somebody try to defend it. Never seen that one. I'd love to see it, though. If you know somebody who has defended the thesis that, the form, the way in which the Roman Rite expresses itself in, at the time of Trent is essentially, with just a few minor differences, the same as in the 1st century in Rome or 2nd century in Rome. I'd love to see that. Put me onto that one. But I don't think it can be maintained. Therefore, I'm not buying this comment about the apostolic liturgy. And I don't think it's appropriate to speak of the apostolic liturgy as opposed to the Novus Ordo. That's, to me, rhetoric. That's, to me, also adopting a position that's untenable. However well-intentioned. I'm sure he's well-intentioned. I'm not knocking him there. And as I said, I really liked Cassman. I thought, man, this guy, he conducted himself really well. Gosh, I wish I were like him. I wish I were like him and Andrew. I wish I could conduct myself in some of these debates that well. It seems to me like I wouldn't do as well as they did. So I mean, hats off to him. I think he did really well in presenting his position. I think he was incredibly charitable and professional. But I would say that is a position that can't be maintained. Unless he would say, no, you're reading too much into me when I speak of the apostolic liturgy. I'm not saying as opposed to the Novus Ordo. Well, okay, well, if it's not opposed to the Novus Ordo, why even mention it in this debate? I mean, how does it even make sense to even, why bring it up? Seems to me like the only reason why we would bring it up is because you think that it's the apostolic liturgy as opposed to the Novus Ordo. Let's wrap that up, though.
and was taken to all of the missionary places around the world with tremendous success.
Not really. I mean, the Roman Rite wasn't taken to all the missionary places in the world. Byzantine liturgy was taken. Some of the non-Byzantine liturgies was taken in many places. Those were successful. The Byzantine liturgy was especially successful. That's not to say that they were as successful as the Roman Rite. I think the Roman Rite has been the most successful. And I think the reason why, at least one reason why the Roman Rite has been the most successful in the world is because of how expedited it is. But notice the irony there. It is expedited, historically considered, compared to the other liturgies, being 3 hours long, or longer. Compared to some of the other liturgies, especially Eastern liturgies, which are much longer and have way more prayers in them. The Roman Rite was kind of bare bones skeleton. And I actually think that that's why it was so flourished so well, is it's just efficient. It's efficient. So I'm not knocking the Roman Rite historically. I'm not knocking any of the rites. They're all equally venerable. But might we say that, okay, well, I do think that there are some things that this rite does ideally that this rite doesn't. Yeah, I maintain that. There are some things about the Byzantine liturgy that I think is much more fitting and ideal compared to the Roman Rite, whether we're talking in the pre-conciliar liturgy or post-conciliar. That's why I'm Byzantine. I don't prefer the Roman Rite. However venerable it is, I still want to say, okay, you should be communing infants. You should be chrismating infants. I don't think it's evil that you don't. I don't think it's a matter of them going to hell. I don't think it's most fitting and most appropriate to withhold communion from an infant who's been baptized. I don't think that that's most fitting or ideal. Same with chrismation. And then we can speak of other aspects. Okay.
I think it's impossible to criticize the traditional liturgy without criticizing our Lord and the apostles.
Yeah, well, see, I don't see that. That's where I can say that in the same way that I can say that of the Novus Ordo. I can say that you can't criticize the Tridentine liturgy without criticizing our Lord and the apostles in the same way that I can speak of the Novus Ordo. But I can't say that in a different way. Because in fact, some things in the post-conciliar liturgy are more traditional and go back to the apostles, whereas some of these innovations in the Tridentine liturgy don't go back to the apostles. Communion under one kind does not go back to the apostles. Communion on the tongue does not go back to the apostles. Among other innovations, however necessary and good they were for the Roman Rite, and however fitting they might be for today, they are not what was handed down by the apostles. But I don't think that the Roman Rite has presented some kind of substantial rupture by doing that or has dishonored our Lord. No, I think that there were some necessary reasons to do those things, and the church has that authority to make those modifications. I mean, again, modified what happened in Acts about them forbidding to eat meat with blood in it. The church reversed that, and had good reasons to reverse that. The church can do that. But yeah, that's not the position of the apostles. So what do we mean by you can't criticize the Tridentine liturgy without then in turn doing that to our Lord and the apostles? What do we mean by that we can't say about the Novus Ordo? And whatever those points of rupture would be, I would ask, are they as significant as the points of rupture between the 1st century and the 5th century, and just the 1st century and the promulgation of the Tridentine liturgy? Just consider that. The 1st century, the way that the liturgies were generally celebrated, because I know that there was a lot of diversity, the way the liturgies were generally celebrated in the Jewish context in the 1st century, especially in Jerusalem, but even elsewhere outside in pagan or Gentile areas, the liturgy in the first century compared to the Tridentine liturgy, I think you would find there are more points of discontinuity there than there are between the pre and post conciliar liturgy. So what do we mean by this? Unless we're just taking this position that it's an over idealized understanding of the Roman Rite, to where we think that, the vast majority of its prayers go back to the first century. I don't think that's a tenable position. I don't even think you can say that about the canon. You could say that about the words of institution in the canon. But I'd love to see somebody say that even the majority of the canon can be shown to be from the first century. I'd love to see that. If that's the case, all right, I want to see someone defend it. I haven't seen that one defended. All right, I think I made my point. Looking through the chat. I haven't been able to look at the chat yet. So just been pontificating over here the whole time. Well, really what it is I wasn't able to keep my screen open while also doing the share screen and get it all big enough for me. So now I can kind of look through the chat and see what y'all are saying. Let's see. Oh, here goes an uncharitable comment from John Kalman. Have fun with Novus Ordo, and 70% of your children will reject the faith. Yeah. Again, let's not disparage the promulgation of the liturgy, or the liturgy that has been officially promulgated, lest you then disparage the authority behind it, which is the church that Christ instituted. So again, I don't think that's the kind of attitude we shouldn't adopt. That's the kind of position and behavior we shouldn't take here in these discussions, I think. Yeah, this is a rough one to answer. Justin asks, what would be the drawing line that makes a rite a new rite? Yeah, that's a tough one, because when we define a rite, it's a pretty broad definition. Granted, it's a pretty broad definition, right? If you have a narrow definition of a rite, well, I would say that with a narrow definition, the Roman Rite has not been one rite historically, even prior to the preconciliar liturgy. So I don't know how we could maintain continuity in the Roman Rite with a narrow definition. The definition that I put forward is more Robert Taft's definition. It's a way of life. I think that objectively, the Roman way of life is preserved in the newly promulgated liturgy. Objectively considered, feet on the ground at some of the parishes, some of the Novus Ordo parishes, I don't recognize it as the Roman Rite and Roman way of life. I don't recognize it. I think it is a new rite, but that's not the official liturgy. That's the abuses. Whatever these things are, it's not the official liturgy. In other words, if the official liturgy is celebrated properly, I think that Roman way of life, that Roman Rite, has been preserved. But yeah, I grant that's a broad definition. But if you want to go with a more strict, narrow definition, I should say, I don't think you can maintain that the Roman Rite has been intact as one rite for 2,000 years. Well, I talk about the Roe versus Wade thing. Yeah. It seems like Trent Horn did a really good video on that earlier. I would definitely point you to that. Definitely point you to it. I thought it was good. I'm not sure what I could say that he hasn't already said. Looking through the chat. The Novus Ordo is great, especially when it's done correctly. It's beautiful. Harrison says, Yeah, I mean, if you have it done properly, yeah. I must say there are some aspects to the Tridentine liturgy I would prefer in the Roman Rite compared to some aspects of the Novus Ordo. But then again, there are some aspects of the Novus Ordo, when done properly, that I would prefer over the Tridentine liturgy. Just because it just depends on what we're talking about. But I don't really prefer either. I prefer the Byzantine liturgy. Let's see. Well, I'm looking through the chat, trying to see what all I missed. I don't know if I missed any super chats. I hope I didn't. I wasn't able to see that part of the screen, though, if there were any. Germanica says, but Michael, don't you know that St. Peter celebrated the Latin Mass? Well, I kind of feel like there's a fundamentalist aspect to this. When I hear of, like, this is the apostolic liturgy, I kind of feel like when I've heard family members that said that, Jesus spoke King James English and that, Paul used the King James Bible. I kind of feel like that's folklore. But that's not a tenable position that could be taken seriously. I don't know how to take the claim seriously that the Roman Rite in the Tridentine liturgy is an apostolic liturgy, if what we mean by apostolic liturgy is, in a very, very strict preservation sense. I don't know how to sustain that. But if you mean that it's an apostolic liturgy in the sense that it's a vehicle of sacred tradition, yeah, of course. But so is the Novus Ordo. It's also a vehicle of sacred tradition. So why bringing that up? Unless you're saying that, well, the Novus Ordo isn't. Okay, well, I think we have bigger problems now. I would say all of the liturgies are vehicles of sacred tradition. But obviously, we don't need to confuse ecclesial and liturgical traditions that are post-apostolic or human apostolic. We don't need to confuse those with sacred tradition. They're not the same. Sacred tradition pertains to divine apostolic traditions and revelation. Divine apostolic only. So sacred tradition is only in reference to divine apostolic. Now, human apostolic and even ecclesial traditions, those are to be vehicles for divine apostolic and sacred tradition. Sure. They are to carry them. Yeah, absolutely. But they could do that in different ways. Hence the diversity of liturgical rites. Okay. Some of which even vary on matters of form in the sacraments. I mean, talk about differences. I mean, we have differences in the actual sacraments. And yet we wouldn't say that the Greeks have not preserved the apostolic tradition in the administration of the sacraments. And we wouldn't say that of the Latins either. Yet there's some pretty significant differences with differences in matter or form. So what do we do with that? It's pretty big difference there, right? And I would say that's bigger than any of the differences that you can show me in the post-conciliar era to the Roman Missal. What do we do about the Roman Rite altering the form of the sacraments in some cases? I mean, I think that the church has that authority in some of the sacraments. It has the authority to do that in some of the sacraments, not in the case of baptism and the Eucharist, but in some of the other sacraments, although they're all instituted by Christ, there is a certain amount of leeway in the form of some of the sacraments, and I think that accounts for some of the changes in the Roman Rite to the sacraments. But gosh, those are some pretty significant changes when we speak of changes to the form of a sacrament in the Roman Rite. How do you how do you sustain that while still criticizing the accidental changes to the Roman Missal is kind of my question. The Roman Rite, admittedly, is in a mess, though. I mean, it's in a mess, and prudentially, some of the decisions that were made have brought the Roman Rite into this mess, and maybe some of these changes shouldn't have been made, prudentially speaking. And I think the church could have done a better job prudentially with these liturgical changes, and it wouldn't be in as big of a mess as it is in currently if it had made better prudential decisions. But 2020 is hindsight. We only know that after the fact. Well, I think I got to everything in the comment section. Double checking it here. Do you think a bishop can prohibit a priest from saying Mass ad orientem, even though the Missal implies the priest has this option? But if you read the germ, it does speak of the option of versus populum. I'm not a fan of versus populum. I don't see any good need for it. I don't see any salutary reasons to have changed this. I don't see any good need for it. I don't think it's evil. I don't think it's bad. I just don't think it's ideal. I don't think it's the most fitting direction. And I do think that ad orientem is a human apostolic tradition, and the only time we should ever alter that is when when it's necessary for souls. And I'm just not convinced that this was necessary for souls. Therefore, I think that this is a prudential decision that needs to be reversed, and versus populum should be excluded. So I'm huge into ad orientem. That's a huge reason why I'm also Byzantine. Not only, but yeah, ad orientem is a big deal. But okay, can a priest prohibit a bishop prohibit a priest from saying Mass ad orientem? I don't think he should. Obviously, I don't think he should. But can he? Well, he's not asking you to do something that is contrary to a higher command, because the church doesn't say you have to do ad orientem, because it does give you the other option, even though it's in the Missal, but the germ also gives you another option. So it doesn't say you have to do it. God doesn't say you have to do it ad orientem. So the bishop is not asking you to do something contrary to higher law. So I would argue he has that authority, but he should not say that or use that or make that decision unless it were necessary for souls. And I can't think of any reason why it is necessary for souls to forbid ad orientem. I can't think of any salutary reasons to promote versus populum. Maybe you can. I'd like to hear it. If you have some good reasons for versus populum, hey, I'd love to hear them. Personally, I'm not a fan. Let's see. The Council of Trullo and the Curious Canon 101. That's a book title, Lyndon? Oh, man, I need to check that out. Yeah, Canon 101 about the sacraments that we were talking about on the hand. If you could maybe tell me a little about it, give me a sneak peek. I'd like to hear more. That sounds interesting. The Council of Trullo, I know, is a very complicated issue anyway. So, yeah, I can imagine there's some curious things going on with Canon 101. and clearly I don't maintain Canon 101. I mean, I'm a liturgical spoon guy, so that completely violates Canon 101. That goes completely against Canon 101. And well, it's a disciplinary canon. I think that, the Byzantine liturgy is able to, it was able to modify that canon. So yeah. I don't know how anybody who thinks that there's some kind of infallibility in disciplinary canons explains that as an Eastern Orthodox, for example. Sean McKinney says, "Is your beard made of cardboard?" Yeah, it is. I put it on today. Let's wrap it up here. I think I got everything. Yeah, I don't see anything else. So we'll end it there. I really appreciate y'all watching. I really do. Thank y'all. And as I said, to recap everything, I enjoyed hearing both debaters. And I thought both of them represented their sides well. I thought both men were exceptionally charitable, and I could only hope to be and conduct myself like them. So they set the bar really high, really good standards. I really appreciated them. They handled themselves very well. Clearly, I have some significant differences with Cassman, I would imagine, if I've understood his position correctly based on the debate. So insofar as I've correctly understood him, I would have some significant differences. Not enough to say he's not a brother in Christ or something like that. Obviously he is. But still significant differences and important differences. But that being said, I still think that we can treat each other charitably as brothers in Christ. So yeah, both of them did well. Commend them for their conduct and also for Pius X Schismatic for getting that organized. I know as somebody who tries to organize debates, it's pretty tough. It's really tough getting, especially on a topic like that. So he did well. All right. Again, I appreciate y'all watching. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Also check me out, patreon.com/Reason and Theology, if you want to get access to extra content. Also, if you want, I have now put out the MaximusInstitute.com, St. Maximus the Confessor Institute. If you go there, you can purchase the full course that I am putting on the Magisterium, Understanding the Magisterium. 9 lectures. So it's actually a little longer than that because some of the lectures I've had to break up into multiple lectures. So about 12, 13 lectures at least. It's still ongoing. So, but got 4 of them posted if y'all want to check it out. Again, MaximusInstitute.com, and just go to the Understanding the Magisterium and you'll see the course where you can purchase it there. And I do want to briefly play an ad for the Saint Maker. Let me bring that up here so y'all can check out our sponsor here.
Can a personal planner really make you a saint? The Saint Maker is the first high-performance planner for the spiritual life made by faithful Catholics for faithful Catholics. The Saint Maker is a beautiful, easy-to-carry, and well-crafted companion to your Missal, Bible, and Rosary. Published 4 times per year, each season includes daily planning pages, feast days, and devotions for both forms of the liturgical calendar, goal-setting pages, confession journals, and much more. Visit thesaintmaker.com to shop the planners. Quantities are limited, so head over to thesaintmaker.com to order yours and start your Saint Maker journey today.
And keep in mind, make sure to go to thesaintmaker.com/Reason and Theology. That supports me in what I'm doing here. Because I, of course, get a part of that. So you'll be supporting me in what I'm doing here and also supporting them in the good endeavor that they have. And if you put in the promo code Reason and Theology, you get 10% off. So it's a win-win. You get a discount. You're supporting me. You're supporting them, a good Catholic company. And it's good content. It's good quality product. And it helps you get organized and also helps you grow, because it has good content in there that helps you in your spiritual walk. So be sure to check them out. All right, that's going to do it. We will see y'all tomorrow. Everybody take care. God bless.